visual rendering, a peculiar yet entirely factual historical detail. Ancient Egyptian homes, particularly those of the elite, often incorporated courtyards and open designs to maximize airflow and create shaded areas. This meant that shadows were a constant, dynamic element of their living spaces, perhaps even leading to a heightened awareness of subtle movements in the periphery. Maybe the Pharaoh is just feeling a little nostalgic for his old courtyard and decided your living room would do. You'll find yourself instinctively pulling away from windows at night, drawing curtains tightly as if the darkness outside holds something watchful. You leave lights on throughout your house, a futile attempt to push back against the encroaching gloom, but even the brightest illumination seems to struggle, casting longer, deeper shadows than usual. You start sleeping with a small bedside lamp on, its weak glow a tiny bastion against the overwhelming sense of presence that now fills your bedroom. It's a bit like being a kid again, afraid of the monsters under the bed. But this time, the monsters aren't imaginary. They feel very, very real. The air itself seems to be vibrating with an unseen energy. You hear a low, continuous hum, almost imperceptible, just beneath the threshold of conscious hearing. It's like the sound of a distant giant swarm of insects, or the low thrum of ancient machinery buried deep beneath the earth. It makes your teeth ache, a constant pressure building behind your eyes. Historians still debate the construction techniques used for some of the massive stones in Egyptian monuments. Some theories suggest the use of resonant frequencies or sound to aid in moving them. Perhaps you're just hearing a very, very old construction project. You find yourself talking to yourself more often, whispering out loud, trying to rationalize, to dismiss, to simply acknowledge what you're experiencing. It's just the house settling, you might mutter as a faint creak echoes from the hallway. It's just the wind as a distinct tap, tap, tap comes from a window. No storm is near. The casual sarcasm you once wielded so effortlessly now feels strained, a thin shield against a rapidly encroaching madness. You even try to make jokes about it, but the laughter catches in your throat, hollow and forced. Guess I should have stayed home and watched paint dry. Much safer, less likely to summon an angry spirit. The sense of an unseen presence becomes so overwhelming that you start to feel crowded, stifled in your own home. It's as if invisible bodies are brushing past you, their cold energy raising goosebumps on your skin. You can almost feel their breath on your neck, a dry, dusty exhalation that reeks of grave dust and forgotten millennia. You spin around, convinced you'll catch a glimpse, a fleeting shape, but there's never anything visible. Yet the feeling of being surrounded, outnumbered, never leaves. You're living in a silent spectral party, and you're the only one who can actually see, or rather feel, the uninvited guests. The feeling of unseen presences has intensified, evolving from mere sensations to undeniable physical disturbances. It begins subtly, with objects shifting. You'll leave your keys on the counter only to find them moments later on the floor, or sometimes in a completely different room. You blame your own absent-mindedness, perhaps a mischievous pet, or even just the house settling. But the occurrences become more frequent, more bizarre. A book you were reading suddenly slams shut. A framed photo on a shelf turns itself around It's like a poltergeist has decided your home is the perfect playground for its invisible antics. Then come the sounds. Not the normal creaks and groans of an old house, but distinct, impossible noises. You hear faint whispers, just at the edge of your hearing, too indistinct to make out words, but undeniably human-like. Sometimes it's a low moan, a sound of profound sorrow or perhaps ancient anger, echoing from an empty hallway. Other times it's a dry rustling like ancient linen or papyrus being disturbed, emanating from corners of the room where nothing exists to make such a sound. You find yourself constantly pausing, holding your breath, straining to hear, your heart hammering against your ribs. It's like listening to a ghost radio station, but it's broadcasting directly into your living room. You try to rationalize, of course. It's the pipes, you tell yourself, even as the sound comes from the ceiling or the floor. It's the wind, you insist, even on a perfectly still night. But the sounds are too specific, too deliberate. The subtle clink of what sounds like ancient pottery, the muffled thud of something heavy being moved, the soft scrape of stone against stone. You even hear what sounds suspiciously like a faint, guttural chuckle, deep and ancient, a sound that sends a shiver of pure ice down your spine. Perhaps the Pharaoh has a dark sense of humor, or maybe he just finds your terrified reactions amusing. A fascinating fact about ancient Egyptian burial practices is their meticulous inclusion of grave goods, everything from furniture and clothing to food and even board games, all meant to provide for the deceased in the afterlife. Imagine packing your bags for a really long trip, only to find out you forgot your toothbrush, and now you're stuck in eternity with bad breath. So, perhaps the sounds you're hearing are just the Pharaoh trying to reorganize his afterlife pantry. The visual disturbances escalate beyond fleeting shadows. You start seeing distortions in the air, shimmering heat, hazes in places where there's no heat source, swirling patterns of dust motes that move with an unnerving, deliberate pattern. Sometimes the air itself seems to thicken, to coalesce, almost forming vague, transparent outlines of figures. You blink, rub your eyes, convinced it's a trick of the light, but the images persist, fading slowly, leaving behind a cold spot and a profound sense of despair. It's like your house has become a low-budget special effects set, but the effects are terrifyingly real. One evening, as you're trying to cook dinner, a pot on your stove filled with water suddenly begins to boil violently even though the burner is off. Steam billows and the water bubbles furiously, then just as quickly it stops, becoming perfectly still, as if nothing happened. Your hands shake as you stare at it, your mind reeling. This isn't a coincidence, or a trick of the light, or a draft. This is something profoundly unnatural, a direct, undeniable manipulation of the physical world around you. You're starting to think your kitchen might be haunted by a very particular Pharaoh who enjoys overcooked pasta. Historians still debate the extent of magic in ancient Egyptian society, often distinguishing between Heka, divine authoritative utterance, and more common spells or rituals. However, for the ancient Egyptians, these were not separate concepts. Magic was an inherent part of their worldview, intertwined with religion and daily life. You, however, are now experiencing the practical, rather less charming side of ancient Heka, and it's not making you feel particularly divine. You find yourself instinctively reacting to the disturbances. You duck your head when you feel a cold rush above you, as if an invisible hand is reaching for your hair. You flinch when